Good intentions are not enough. It's very possible to hurt poor people in the very process of trying to help them.
There are two approaches to engaging an under-resourced community. One is going in and saying, you need this. The other approach is going in and asking the question, what do you need?
I don't know of any country that got so much aid and it suddenly became a first world country. I've never heard of such a country. So the track is wrong. That track ends to nowhere.
You know, people have said, we've got to do something, even if it doesn't work. That sometimes they might do things, despite all their best intentions, that actually make the situation worse than it was before.
And they walk around slums hurling shoes at people, hurling t-shirts at people. It would literally be better if those North Americans would just go golfing and never leave home.
Every day I get up and I drive my 20-mile commute to my office at Life.Church.tv in Oklahoma City. We've committed our whole lives to seeing changes in individual lives and communities around the world. We pray, we give, we get our hands dirty, and we really try to do as much good as we see possible. We've been able to mobilize thousands of volunteers in our local communities and sent hundreds more to countries on every civilized continent. But in the midst of all of our efforts, we started to wrestle with some stirring questions. We started to really evaluate ourselves and ask, are we really making a difference? What if there's something we're missing? Are we really helping lead towards true transformation? These questions kept us up at night. We wondered if our good intentions were really helping, or worse, we wondered if they were actually hurting. With so many others trying to accomplish similar outcomes of helping who we've considered the least of these, why was the problem still there? In some cases, we even had to ask, why was the problem growing? We felt like God was calling us, and we even felt good when we had completed our task. Yet little seemed to be changing. We and others had to be missing something.
Oh, you're the burn victim. Well, you're in luck, because I hear laughter is the best medicine. I'll write you a prescription right away.
When you go to the doctor, the first thing the doctor does is try to diagnose what's wrong with you. If the doctor misdiagnoses your disease, or if the doctor only treats symptoms rather than the underlying illness, you won't get better, you might get worse. And notice it doesn't matter how much the doctor loves you. It doesn't matter how compassionate the doctor is. At the end of the day, if the doctor misdiagnoses what's wrong with you, that's not a neutral event. You won't get better, you might very well get worse. The same is true when we work with people who are poor. If we misdiagnose the causes of the problem, then our efforts to help the poor can very well hurt them. It doesn't matter how much compassion we have, it doesn't matter how well-intentioned we are, good intentions are not enough. It's very possible to hurt people in the very process of trying to help them.
We see a problem and we treat symptoms, right? And symptoms counteract other symptoms, and this drug reacts with this drug, and we constantly are chasing systems and managing symptoms rather than getting to the core issue of the human condition. I've seen it time and time again. I've made the same mistake where we go in trying to solve a problem and we end up becoming a part of the problem.
We saw people come in and want to do quote unquote good, but really their intention was just unfortunately too short. You have to make a long-term commitment to a people and a culture to see a long-term change, and a bottle of water is not going to change them long-term. You can disperse all the aid you want, but the reality is the next day those people are hungry again. So if you want to feed 9 million people every day, that may help, but it doesn't change their well-being.
That was it. Too often we found our efforts were out of a misdiagnosis of the problems our communities and neighbors were facing. We saw lack of things. We brought a carload of things we didn't need. We saw lack of food. We pulled in with a food truck. Rather than looking deeper at what may have caused the symptoms we saw, we simply responded to what was in front of us, and in many cases, enabling the disease to continue to grow. And the statistics are telling. In the U.S. alone, we are at an all-time high in our funding of poverty alleviation, and yet our own poverty rate seems to remain the same. Worldwide, private spending on aid to developing countries has never been higher, and yet the disparity between the rich and poor countries has never been worse. But it doesn't stop with just material needs. Despite monumental efforts around the world, we see higher divorce rates, depression, substance abuse, natural disasters, human trafficking, violence, disease, and a host of other needs, all showcasing the relational and spiritual poverty gaps our world is facing.
The World Bank did a study a number of years ago in which they interviewed 60,000 poor people around the world and asked them the question, what is poverty? And the answers they got were remarkable, because while poor people around the world certainly mentioned a lack of material things, they talked in far more psychological and social terms. Poor people around the world will typically say things like this: I feel ashamed, I feel embarrassed, I feel less than human. They describe their poverty in far more psychological and social terms, and we define their poverty in far more material terms. And that disconnect between how they describe it and how we describe it creates a huge problem.
That disconnect changes everything. When people describe their poverty, they don't point to their circumstances, their health, or even their finances. They typically point to their sense of self-worth. We subtly feel a sense of pride because we feel like we're making a difference, unaware that at the same time, we might actually be making the other person feel less valuable. Meet Joe. Joe lives in London and owns an internet technology company that he started. He has a wife, 3 kids, and a dog named Bella. Joe enjoys a round of tennis, coaching his son's soccer team, and a good espresso from his local coffee shop every morning. He's done pretty well by most people's terms and feels like a champ. Now meet Greg. Greg also lives in London, but lost his job over a year ago and hasn't been able to land a steady one since. Greg also has a wife and 2 kids. Greg and his family live in an apartment for now, but may soon be forced to move because of their inability to pay the rent. Talk about a downer. Greg has been feeling pretty bad too. Not only does he feel like he can't keep a job, the feeling of seeing his wife and kids suffer from his presumed inability to provide for them crushes his spirit even more. Compared to Joe, he feels like he just doesn't add up. Joe has also been feeling a few things. He looks at his life and realizes there are people who don't quite have it as good as he does, and something about that just doesn't sit well with him. So, in his true innovative nature, he seeks to satisfy the desire by doing something good and helping those in need. Joe's church connects him to Greg through a local mission at Greg's apartment complex. Joe gets to know a little about Greg's situation and feels pretty bad about it. Joe sees Greg's kids and family and realizes that they may not have enough money for Christmas presents this year. Joe knows exactly what to do. Christmas morning approaches, and Greg's family is having a nice, simple time together at home. Then, Joe arrives. And Joe doesn't arrive just by himself. He's loaded with iPods, gift cards, games, clothes, and even a puppy. Greg's kids are freaking out, and honestly, well, so is Greg, but probably for a totally different reason. Joe leaves and heads home, feeling quite fulfilled. But what about Greg? How do you think he feels? Joe just exploited Greg's deepest sense of his poverty, his lack of self-esteem. Not only do his kids see him as a failure, but he feels he'll never amount to the man that Joe is. When we look back at Joe's gesture, it wasn't that he was trying to bring Greg down. He He was actually trying to bless the family and bring them up. But still, his actions made it worse. What he did actually pushed Greg even farther into his inward poverty. Not to mention, pushed his own sense of self-pride that much higher.
That's what the U.S. church is doing to people all over the world. We're running into slums, treating people like they're animals in a zoo or in a circus, looking at them, gawking at them, taking pictures of them, and then handing them things that communicate to them, you're not as good as I am, and you need me to fix you. It's demeaning, and it takes those people who are feeling a profound sense of shame, a profound sense of embarrassment, a profound sense of inadequacy that they can't do it. It's communicating to them, yeah, you're right, you can't do it. And it locks them into the very problems that we're trying to get them out of.
So many times we go into communities and we say, this is what you need, and if you're to get the resources that we provide, we want to see these measurables, we want to see these outcomes. And it adds sorrow, it adds burden to people who are already burdened. They have conversations like, well, that's really not a beneficial project, but if we're going to maintain the relationship and still get the money that they give us, we're going to have to do it. It means nothing, it has no value at all, only for the people who are seeking an experience.
You know, as the outsiders flying into any country, anywhere in the world, you can show up with the mindset that you're bringing the gospel to the ends of the earth. And I think if you think you're going to change a nation in a week, you must be pretty arrogant. Because last I checked, God's still trying to change me. It's going to take my whole life.
Now, again, remember the paradigm. You've got people who are saying, I feel less than human, I feel ashamed, I feel embarrassed, I don't feel like I'm really part of society. Then you send out short-term missions teams, and they walk around slums with shirts that say, I've been sent to you, the least of these.
While all of this hits really close to home, and we never would have imagined that our efforts may be doing more harm than good, there is no reason to be discouraged. We've learned so much, and we've embraced new ways of thinking that has helped us to do better at doing good. As followers of Christ, we are all called to help others. So my challenge to you is to identify what God has called you to do to help others. What opportunities do you have at work, in your neighborhood, your school, your community to help others? Or has God put something on your heart that you are so passionate about that it moves you to take action? As we begin to move forward, be open to adopt new ways of thinking, so when you do reach out to help others, you can do so in a way that helps, not hurts. As we do, we'll open the door for God to do more than we've ever imagined.
God is fundamentally a relational being. He's three in one. Father, Son, and Holy Ghost exist from all eternity in relationship with each other. And He's wired human beings in His image. We're made for relationship. If poverty is rooted in broken relationships, then it's going to take relational approaches to address that. It's going to take people walking side by side across time in serious, heavy-duty relationships.
That's the only way to have permanent, long-term change. Anything else is just temporary.
It's a relationship. It's not an experience. It's a relationship.